Hey, this is Danielle, and I'm the VP of Options at Simpler Trading. Welcome to today's episode of your Daily Five. So, today I'm going to be talking about the pullback that we're experiencing in the NASDAQ. And then we're also going to look at a few different critical semiconductor companies as well. So, starting off with the QQQs, this is the product that I like to trade personally when the indexes start to pull back. I think it's a great spot to put on some hedges, and so that's the reason why I normally look at the QQQs anytime I'm trying to do any kind of index related trade. I like to focus pretty heavily on the NASDAQ, relative strength winners and losers, and keep a pretty close eye on what this index is doing overall. Now, looking at this chart, you can see the way that the index traded higher into the end of July. Now, it's pretty typical that the NASDAQ will trade higher going into earnings season. Okay. So, um, you know, it's it's very common for us to see a nice run into earnings. This is especially true, when we're in a strong trending market, which we are this year. And if you go back in time, you can see that quarter over quarter, especially in the context of the bull market. Um, you know, you have March and April. This was a pretty typical time for the NASDAQ to trade higher because we had earnings season right here. So, move into earnings. Then we had just kind of this sideways consolidation. Didn't even really have much of a pullback there. But then if you go back a little bit further and you look at the rally that we saw going into earnings, January and February, you can see that right here. And then after earnings season was over, we saw this nice little pullback. So this is a pretty typical pattern I used to play all the time in the bull market. Obviously, when we were in the midst of the bear market, that pattern did shift because instead of seeing a rally going into earnings, saw a little bit more indecisiveness and sideways trade. That being said, even last July, that was a pretty substantial um, bear market rally going into earnings, and then last April too. So, pattern shifted a little bit throughout that bear market, but we're back into normal trade. And part of that normal trade is looking for a pullback after earnings is over. Now, that usually just comes through because we've had this exuberance and excitement, and earnings is pretty much winding down and we start to roll. Now, in this case, this roll is a little bit more substantial than what we normally see because when I'm looking for a pullback, I'm normally just looking for a nice little, buy the dip in the context of the uptrend. In this case, what we're seeing here is a shift in a trend. We can see that the candles have shifted, and instead of being up above the moving averages, now these are below the moving averages. We also have multiple moving average crosses. So on my charts, I have the 8, 21, and 34 EMA along with the 50, 100, and 200 SMAs. And we can see that we have some moving average crosses here with these candles below. So that is a shift into a downtrend. It's a pretty substantial move. And right now, with the NASDAQ, the QQQs underneath these areas of resistance, it's telling me that, the path of least resistance is lower. Now, what's going to matter in this instance is going to be a few things. Number one, the put call ratio is pretty high. Whenever the put call ratio gets incredibly high, you have to be on the lookout for a short squeeze rally. So, if there is a reason for the market to gap up, we might see some short covering, and that could potentially break us out of this downtrend. So I am looking for that. Or the other thing that could break us out of the downtrend would be some of these relative strength winners, really shifting the game here. So another area that I really like to focus on is going to be SMH. It's the Semiconductor ETF, and a lot of the top weighted products in the Nasdaq are also top weighted products in the semiconductor space. And what this space does is going to be indicative of whether or not we keep pulling back or not. And on this chart, you can see that you had a really nice trend, and then things changed, right? We got towards the end of earnings season. We saw moving averages start to cross. We saw price fall below these moving averages. And now this is in a downtrend. So, where do we go from here? Well, let's look at a couple of the most important names that are coming up. Now, actually, let's look at AMD first. So, AMD has already reported earnings. You can see that this earnings report was all the way back in here. That was on August 1st. And this is, I don't know, one of my favorite names in the space, anyways. And I think it's one of the most important. Um, but everybody, has their own opinion on which semis are the most important. But I tend to be partial to AMD, so that's why I say it's the most important. But when you're looking at this chart and you see the way that it reacted after earnings, you see how it was trading higher going into earnings. You hit, you fell, and then you haven't been able to get through any of this resistance. And now we're stuck below all these resistance zones. You have price resistance, you have your moving averages, and then you've shifted into a downward trend. On this one, however, we also have a squeeze. A squeeze is a consolidation breakout signal. And, normally the squeeze is going to fire in the direction of the trend. For this year, that trend has been up. But what we can see is that this pattern is shifting. If you go back and you look at where we saw the last squeeze, this squeeze occurred when the price was falling below the moving averages. We had these moving average crosses, and this fired to the downside. So, with this pattern setting up pretty much the same, while I would love to see AMD fire to the upside because I am a shareholder and I continue to buy more shares, this one is a little bit of a canary in the coal mine because if this one fires to the downside, it's going to, have a continued impact on the NASDAQ lower. And, as of right now, when I'm making this video, AMD is down 3% today. So, not looking too good for AMD. Now, I want to also look at Applied Materials because this one is going to be reporting earnings on the 17th after market close. And you'll notice that this one has, really nice trend this year. But over the course of the last 4 sessions, you can see how it also has broken down below these critical moving averages too. So, this earnings report is going to be really important. And if what we see from Applied Materials is, a big break lower, this could fall all the way down to 130. Or it could be a positive move and we could see it trading up into 150. But either way, the way that this thing breaks out is going to, have an impact. On the Nasdaq and in the semiconductor space. So this is a really important earnings report to keep a lookout for. If you look at the way that it's reacted for the past couple reports, you can see a report right here. You had a very, very nice rally post earnings. If you look at this report right here, we traded lower going into earnings, but then we had a really nice rally post earnings. If you look at this report here, looks like, initially traded lower, but then it rallied after earnings. So we do have a history here on this stock of, trading higher. The question is this quarter, is it going to be good enough to see the stock break up above resistance? So that one is going to be a major focus point. And then let's talk about Nvidia. So Nvidia is going to be reporting earnings next week. Now, the I, I have, conflicting statements about Nvidia, which may not sound helpful, but well, hear me out. So when you're looking at Nvidia, Nvidia is one of my top stock holdings in my aggressive portfolio. Really strong stock, super popular. Everybody's looking at it. It's been on a crazy rally. Last quarter in particular, it gapped up 26% after earnings and it had this breakaway gap, beautiful move. It also has a daily squeeze, but that daily squeeze is fired to the downside. I was hoping I could get $500 a share out of Nvidia before the report, but with that daily squeeze firing to the downside instead of the upside, I'm not going to get that price target just yet. Now, if we look at the past couple quarters and we say, okay, last quarter was really strong. We had this huge breakaway gap and everybody's all into AI. What happened, the quarters before that? Well, here you have a quarter right here. Again, you have a really strong breakaway gap. Quarter before that, looks like you pulled back slightly, but then it took off. So when you're looking at this stock, you look at it and you say, well, duh, obviously it's bullish. You have these huge moves and everybody's excited about earnings. The problem with that is the expectations. Okay. The expectations are very, very high. All right. And when the expectations are incredibly high, if they do not absolutely crush it, then this thing could drop like a rock. Sorry, that's supposed to be a crying smiley face. So while I love Nvidia, I'm a shareholder. Like I said, it's one of my top weighted stocks in my portfolio. Um, I am very concerned about this earnings report because I think that the expectations are incredibly high. And I think that if this thing cannot meet expectations, then I think we're going to see the NASDAQ just completely roll. So when we're looking at the semiconductor space, I think these are really important. And there's been a couple others too that have already reported and they've done well, like Lam Research did really well over earnings. You can see the way that it gapped up. And the problem here is that, yes, it gapped up and it had a great report, but do you see how this is also shifting in the trend? No good. So that's not looking too promising. Look at Taiwan Semi. Taiwan Semi had what I thought was a good report, but disappointed some folks, and we've seen it trade lower after earnings. So when you're looking at these semiconductor stocks, just make sure that you're keeping your expectations in line with what is, you know, actually likely to happen, because there's a lot of people who will go into like Nvidia earnings and say, hey, it's had this massive move the past 2 quarters in a row, so I'm going to go into it and I'm going to load my account up with long calls, and that's when you can get absolutely crushed. So we're seeing that with a lot of different tickers that are pulling back right now, and that have pulled back after earnings. Even Broadcom, that has been incredibly strong, is pulling back here too. So definitely on the watch list. Make sure you keep an eye on Nvidia, AVGO, AMD, SMH, and the QQQs, in addition to the rest of the primary semiconductor stocks, because what they do here is going to determine if the NASDAQ can break through this resistance and continue on the uptrend, or if this thing is going to roll over and die. So, if you want to follow me and learn anything else, you can join me on Twitter. So my profile is going to be at Trader Danielle, TraderDanielle. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below. You can also join me on my YouTube channel at Trader Danielle. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.